And we're back. Hopefully, that's going to be the only hiccup for our first stream.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Fingers
Okay, we're
crossed,
back.
that's our only major
Yay.
technical malfunction. So let's get back into it.
Fabulous.
So, Chris, you were talking about Roman vacations and some of the things that we didn't get to put in the episode, but we really should have, such as a source discussion.
I
Who
was
were
talking about Roman vacations. Yeah.
who were our sources for the Roman vacations episode?
So, one of the primary sources that I used was the letters of Pliny, the later half of the first century AD and the early second century AD. And most of what we know about him is from his very, very, very curated letters, which are 100% there to be read by literally everyone in the world. It's kind of like those people who wrote diaries, but like with the intent of publishing them within the next 5 to 10 years, so they could see everyone's responses to it. Yeah, so
Oh no.
that's kind of how
Yeah,
we know about
we're
Pliny.
lacking again,
Oh,
you
we're
guys.
lagging again? Oh
Yeah.
no. I was just getting into it
Oh
too.
my god. And again. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
This is
Your
fun.
internet really doesn't like it, does it?
No, it's all of our test streams, believe me, we tested this out for months to fix all of this.
Yeah.
It's not
And it
lagging
just
now,
it
so
just doesn't like this.
let's just keep going. So you were saying about
Let's just keep going.
wealthy
Yeah.
Roman aristocrats and their diaries. And actually,
Yeah. So mhm.
I'm just switching over the slides. Keep going.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Yeah, and see if like again if we have to turn down the video quality just a little bit, because currently it's streaming at yeah 720. So
Yeah, let's.
anyway,
It's
going
stabilizing.
back to Pliny. Okay, cool. So he was. I wouldn't really call him a historian so much as he was an aristocrat who wrote things and lived and tried to pretend he was a philosopher
And
and,
which Pliny is
did
this?
some governmental things along the way. Uh, this is the younger one. So
Pliny the
yeah,
Younger.
the reason he's known as Pliny the Younger is because well, he's the younger Pliny. The elder Pliny is perhaps the more esteemed of the two. He was also a statesman and aristocrat, but he's most well known for publishing his Natural History, which is a gigantic encyclopedia on essentially everything around the Roman world, natural history from trees and plants to animals and recipes and how to make wine and
And this is
some
Pliny the
strange
Elder.
medical cures. This is Pliny the Elder. Yeah.
So,
He's also famous for dying at Pompeii. Well, not at Pompeii, but in the eruption of Vesuvius.
so why was he in Pompeii? Was he at the eruption of Vesuvius?
So, sort of. Pliny the Younger actually wrote a big old letter, which, of course, he self published, that he sent to another historian, Tacitus, I believe. When Tacitus is like, hey, I want to write about what happened at Vesuvius. So, Pliny the Younger is like, it can be helpful. And he sent this letter detailing, his own personal experiences. And there's this very vivid description of his uncle, who was a Navy commander at the time. He was stationed a little bit south of Pompeii with a detachment of the Roman Navy, and essentially their job was to protect from pirates or to help citizens out when they needed it. So in this case, like obviously, A, there were people who needed help, and B, there was a cool natural phenomenon that he'd never seen before, so he got very excited about going over there. So he took his entire fleet over there, and promptly died because the air was ash and he had asthma. But it seems that his fleet at least helped people get out, evacuate, provide some sort of humanitarian support, while the entire world was collapsing. So the Pliny we're talking about vacation wise was a very different person, and he was the younger one. And during that eruption at Pompeii, Pliny the Younger actually mentions that he was considering going with his uncle, but he was really, really, really tired and didn't kind of didn't feel like it. Like he had a really good book, and like he was definitely super busy, guys. He was on vacation. Long
Too,
story short.
too busy on
Um,
vacation to respond to a natural disaster. I understand now
that's the line.
why we know more about Pliny the Elder than we do about Pliny the Younger. Did Pliny the Younger do anything interesting?
So Pliny the Younger, in some ways we do know a lot about Pliny the Younger because we have all of these self promoting letters that he wrote. Not only his letters about what he did on vacation and how he'd go to the mansion and really liked the equivalent of like lying in his hammock and reading and writing and dictating to his slaves, but he like one very important thing about him is he was one of the few mildly competent politicians to survive the reign of Domitian, because Domitian really likes chopping off heads. So Pliny was sent in the reign of Trajan to be a governor over in Anatolia, northern Anatolia, I believe, somewhere around Bithynia. And some of the stuff we really know about him is he'd send these very long, very detailed letters to Trajan, kind of like if anyone here has been to university, kind of like how an undergrad will send an email to a professor. He's like, "Oh, great Trajan, you're brilliant, and I love you, and you're the best ever, and you've done all this great, amazing stuff, and you're divine and the bestest, and I've got this problem, and because you're the bestest and the smartest and the greatest, you know everything, and you're the only one who can help us with this problem. Obi-Wan, you're my only hope," kind of message. And well, the the problem, then the response from Trajan was essentially a one-liner, you're there, you know more about the local people, take care of it.
So speaking
And that
about
was the entirety of the
so
letter.
speaking of the local people and Bithynia, do we have any like were there Roman vacation homes in Anatolia? Was that a popular vacation spot? Do we have archaeological evidence?
Oh, very much so. As far as I can tell, at least, most of the Roman vacation homes that we very much referred to in this episode on Roman vacations were in Italy. So if you're wealthy enough, we mentioned in the episode, it was very popular for the wealthy to get out of Rome in the summer to avoid the malaria waves and the mosquitoes and all the gross crap that went around.
Wait,
Wasn't a
hold
very good
on.
smelling city.
I have a
Hmm.
question. Is there a
I've got an
difference
answer.
between like we talk about all these Roman villas, which are these like great palatial like country estates. Are these the vacation homes that you're referring to?
Yes, oftentimes yes. Like you do have some towns like Baiae, which is currently underwater, but was a very big Las Vegas on the Mediterranean over in Italy. But those there weren't too many of those towns. Like Pompeii was one, Baiae was one. There were some other, seaside resort kind of towns. But most of the time, if someone was going out to a vacation home, they owned a villa out in Italy. And like if you owned one villa, it's like, oh, you own a cabin. It's so nice. And you weren't really wealthy unless you owned like two or three of them.
Okay. Uh
Yeah.
so moving really quickly because we do have to move forward. We've got a time schedule. From vacations to gladiatrixes. Is there anything you wanted to mention that didn't make it into the final cut of
In
gladiatrixes?
Oh, in the gladiatrixes, it's really hard to. So the difficult part about gladiatrices, writing that episode, was there's very little surviving data. We know that they existed. We know that there are a few sidelong references to them in some texts, and there are a couple of archaeological surviving remnants of them, but there's very little outside of that. So oftentimes with the script, I had to pull together these very tangential references and make a cohesive narrative with them, just taking like some other information that we know.
So what references did we have? Like what do we have?
So what we do have is we have one single visual depiction that's confirmed to be gladiatrices. It's an engraving over in Halicarnassus, and I think it might still be in Halicarnassus. The British Museum might have stolen it. I'm not sure. But it depicts a gender bent Achilles facing off against the Queen of the Amazons. And we don't have much there other than, it was Achillea versus Amazonia, and after the battle, they were apparently both freed. And then we have an inscription from the late second century AD, probably within 50 years of gladiatrices being banned, over in Ostia, I believe, by a guy named Hostilianus, who was very proud of himself. And he's like, "Oh, I'm the first ever to be able to put swordswomen and gladiators on the arena since the founding of the city, which is a blatant lie because it had been done many, 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 many
So
times.
hold on, you said gladiatresses banned. What? Who banned
Yes.
them and why?
So Timius Severus banned them in the early third century, and the reason he banned them was well, there's actually a really interesting story about this. So Septimius Severus was not Italian. I believe he was North African, and he
That's
like
going to become relevant later.
gladiatrices. Yes. So gladiatrices were women performing was much more popular outside of Italy. Italy itself, Romans, like the Italian Romans, were much more prudish in a way. They had very different sensibilities. So while in Greece you had women doing foot races and stuff, in North Africa you had these different competitions. So Septimius Severus brought in women to this major competition in Rome, and the arena was instantly full of catcalling and people making fun of the noble women who were sitting in the audience, saying, "Oh wow, look at those ladies in the arena. They're pretty badass, huh? How about you guys? What do you guys do? Why aren't you that badass?" So not only was it the catcalling that got on Septimius Severus's nerves, it was the fact that the common people started mocking Roman noble women for being too soft and in their palanquins and stuff, as opposed to these
And
performers on the arena floor.
and that's definitely a
So
problem.
yeah, so he banned, yes.
Interesting. So he banned them not because he had an issue with gladiatrixes directly, but because he didn't like what happened when they like went out onto the sands.
It seems that way, yeah. It
In-
seems that way. Like we have one source that talks about it, and after that source we don't have any references to gladiatrices, so the inference there is that ban probably held.
Interesting. We're gonna step away from gladiatrixes for a moment, and our next set of corrections is coming from Vaughn, who wrote the Carthaginian Navy and the Punic Sicilian Wars. So Vaughn, what did you want to talk about before you what did you want to talk about that didn't make it into the episode?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there are not a lot of corrections, I'll say. There are just a couple of small points that I wanted to expand on in case anybody, I guess, in case anybody had any like questions or problems, right? So the first one, we have a long video on the Carthaginian Navy. Um, 6 minutes, we talk about sources, right? Or we have questions about sources, I guess, based on how we know how many people served on ships and what the ships were like. And we'll get into this more later when it comes to my turn, really, to talk about a bunch of stuff. But mostly the crew info, ship info estimates, they come from sources on Athenian and Rhodian ships, which we then have to kind of extrapolate further to just assume that Carthage had those same numbers. And that's a pretty strong assumption, but we just don't have the information available literarily to be able to say exactly with perfect certainty. And then later, I don't know if anybody noticed, but at 24 minutes in the Carthaginian Navy ship, we talk about the Carthaginians taking Sardinia and using Sardinia to kind of control southern Gaul. And this is sort of a little bit left out here, right? Is that later we'll talk about Alalia, the Battle of Alalia. And one of the reasons why the Battle of Alalia happened was because they were into controlling the trade that's coming out of those areas.
So,
So we don't necessarily go ahead.
just out of curiosity, why were the Carthaginians interested in southern Gaul? Like, what was there that was making them money?
Yeah, so there's a lot of raw resources that come out of not just southern Gaul, but if you think about it, the way to get to the rest of Gaul is through southern Gaul.
That's true.
Hence why there are Greek colonies on the southern Gaul coast, and that's because the Greeks wanted to do this too.
Like
But
Massila
for instance,
and
yes, yeah,
Emporion.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for instance, they have tin is a big resource that's coming through southern Gaul and through Spain because tin is not found in a lot of places out in the east, even though everybody uses it for bronze.
Yeah, that's a very
But it
important
is found.
military resource, and also
Yeah,
just like
yeah,
general manufacturing.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Not just for military, but for making basic things. But it definitely comes through Spain. It comes from Cornwall in England, and I believe Brittany. So they're getting a lot of tin, and really they're just trying to protect where they get all their trade from. That's what the Phoenicians and Punic people are all about,
Yeah,
right?
that's the basis of their empire. They were mostly just setting up ports and naval bases to protect their trade, right?
Yeah, and more so than setting up, they are taking advantage of the colonies and the trade routes that already that existed from the previous Phoenicians, right?
Mm-hmm. So these previous Phoenicians, where are they from, and how long had they been like colonizing stuff before Carthage took the scene?
Yeah, they've been around for a long time. The Phoenicians, they come from, so Phoenicia, if you're not aware, is the coast of the Middle East. It's right above, basically above Israel today, below Turkey. That's the area we're generally talking about. That's where the Phoenicians are coming from. The big states are like Tyre and Sidon, and they since like maybe as far back as 1100 BCE or so, they're sending out colonies to move not just close by. We have colonies in like Crete, or at least shrines in Crete, but very far away. They're sending them to like Spain. So like Cadiz is supposed to be, according to the literature, is the oldest city in Europe, and it's Phoenician. The archaeology doesn't quite pan that out, but at any rate, it's very old.
Why were they going that
So
far? I mean, I imagine like the Western Mediterranean was very, very far away during that period
yeah,
of time. What
yeah,
was
it's
like
extremely
forcing
far,
them? Or
and it's really again, it's all about trade. So they're sending out colonies to be able to get access to these important resources. And again, tin is a hugely important resource. It's incredibly valuable, and it is not found in a lot of places other than up in that area. Coming down through Spain, in England, in bits of France, in bits of Spain, that kind of thing. So it's plentiful with respect to tin, and tin is just hard to come by. But also silver. There's a lot of silver in Spain. The Romans will exploit that heavily later. So there are just a lot of natural resources that they're exploiting.
interesting. And so, did you have any corrections for the Sicilian Wars episode? So, on from General Carthage and more zoomed in.
Yeah, the I guess the one thing, it's not so much a correction as I wanted to mention at 6 minutes and 30 seconds or so, we talk about Malchus very quickly. And I'm not going to go too much into Malchus, but I just wanted to point out that Malchus, if you do want to look him up, is a very neat character. He is the first historical figure of Carthage that we have. So, guy that we can point to him probably being real. But he's also semi-mythical, and his name might just mean like the Punic word for king. Something, it's not entirely different from how Romulus means, like basically little Roman guy or like Roman man. Um, but he's an interesting figure, and we'll probably get more into him in other episodes.
So, we've actually covered most of the Roman vacation stuff in our preliminary discussions. But let's see. Do we have any audience questions pertaining to the Roman vacations or Roman gladiatrixes? I've got one here. Did people from other provinces like North Africa or Greece go to Rome on vacation to watch gladiator fights, like sports traveling today? Chris, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, actually, sorry. Yeah, I actually do know a few things like that. So one really interesting thing is we do have just some quick background on Roman advertisement. So the way Romans would advertise events is they would hire a guy, and that guy would go paint the thing on a wall. So modern day graffiti, because like they weren't going to waste paper necessarily on posting things on the wall. So they just get a guy to paint an advertisement on the wall. Yeah. And so some of these advertisements can look like kind of kitschy because again, it's just a guy doodling on a wall and it depends on the artist. But one thing that's really, really, really neat that we've actually found, going back to relevant conversational topics, is we found some of these posters on walls that are advertising games that are going to happen in towns that are, 100 kilometers away, give or take. So you don't advertise if you're not going to get any business from it. It just doesn't make sense. So by these advertisements, yes, people actually travel to go to specific games or to see specific acts. Like if there was a certain traveling troupe that was really, really, really cool and, very much in demand, 100% they would that people would travel to go see that. If it happened to be, a day trip, or you go there, spend the night somewhere, and come on back the next day after the event, that could also be a thing.
So
Um,
the question
mhm,
here is focused on North Africa or Greece going to Rome. And while I know you can't answer that one
yeah.
specifically, was sea travel to go like see a game or to go on vacation a thing?
Mhm. Yeah, so it depends on the person, obviously. People in the modern day might not realize exactly how mobile people were in the ancient world. People could easily go from Rome to Alexandria in a couple days of sea travel. It wouldn't take all that long. It wasn't all that hard. The sea networks were very, 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 very well trafficked, especially, for grain barges, food trade, the whole nine yards. Um, so it wouldn't be too difficult to travel. It wouldn't be too expensive to travel. There's a fun reference in one of the two surviving Roman novels, the fragmentary one in Satyricon, where one guy just basically hops. He does the equivalent of that trope of hopping on a train and just going into the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I'm familiar
he
with the
hops on a
song,
merchant
yes.
ship. Exactly. He hops on a merchant ship that goes all the way to India and comes back the next year, with a whole bunch of money and spices and the whole nine yards. But he just went on a random adventure. Didn't cost him anything. He just signed on as a random crewman. So, like, you could get on a trip to go to a place and work your way, or you could, pay your way. But it wouldn't have been too difficult. And maybe one of the best random references to this is the the reference to our episode on a dolphin that nearly destroyed a town, where there was essentially a tourist attraction where there was a really, really, really cool there was a dolphin that befriended a boy, and it's always fun to see a tame dolphin. Everyone loves that. But the problem was there were so many visitors, so many tourists that came into this town from all over the empire that the town couldn't actually handle it. They didn't have any tourist facilities. It was a small fishing village. They didn't like tourists. They didn't like all these people who are now demanding all these luxuries, and also costs for everything were skyrocketing because the tourists were eating everything and they were able to pay more than, again, a fishing village was. So eventually they killed the dolphin to stop the visitors. But it's a great anecdote that really
Yeah.
highlights how much people would travel and how quality of life very much depended on where exactly you were living.
Okay. And if anyone in the audience is more interested in that, we do have an entire episode dedicated to it. So with that,
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna keep us moving forward here for a second into Roman gladiatrixes and some of our prepared questions that we've gotten from the patrons. By the way, if you are one of our patrons, you do have an option. Like, I will ping you and tell you about this stream and ask you, give us your questions and we will answer them, like, first before we take any audience questions. So, what was the what's the deal with gladiator schools? How are gladiators trained? And what's the difference between a traveling and an established school?
Oh, that's a really great question. So gladiator schools, we're actually going to be doing an episode on this later where we really look into the life of a gladiator, what it was like actually living in one of their schools, because we've actually found some of these gladiator schools. The most intact ones, of course, are at Pompeii, where that's where the majority of our really, really, really good evidence of a snapshot of a day in the life comes from. So these permanent gladiator schools were, in a modern perspective, they're more similar to prisons that where all the prisoners did an incredibly heavy protein workout. Every single one of them was a gym bro trying for those gains, yada yada yada. But the thing about these ludi, as they were known, is they were all male. We haven't found a single one of these that was co-ed or women only. These permanent gladiator schools
So wait,
were
hold on.
male
So
only. Yeah,
Ludi is the term for a gladiator school. How do you spell that?
yeah. Well, Ludi is the plural, the Latin plural. Ludus, Ludus, is the singular. So it'd be life in the ludus. Um, and it's essentially just the word for school, a training ground.
Okay.
Um, so these were male only. It was men were trained, equipped, blah 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 blah, and their daily schedule kind of sucked. It was they slept, they ate a lot. Like if you look at Michael Phelps videos where he has to eat 20,000 calories or some nonsense like that, that was gladiators, and their food was not as tasty as Michael Phelps's food.
And presumably here
Um,
in the modern day, we have much more efficient food for getting calories into someone who's
yes.
bodybuilding or working out.
Yes, and in the modern day, we also have protein powder, which you can put in basically anything.
So what were they eating?
So they ate this very 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 bland porridge, and we actually did a collaboration with Max Miller on Tasting History, and he actually made this fava bean porridge, which
Ugh.
it's really a type of gruel almost, and that was the basis of most of their diet was this fava bean porridge. It was very heavy in protein, very heavy in carbs. You could add like little bits of stuff to it to kind of change the flavor. So like you could add some apples for your breakfast, and then maybe you could add some generally not bacon. Gladiators mostly went for vegetarian stuff.
Why did
But
they do that? Isn't
Mhm.
meat a more efficient source of protein if you're bodybuilding?
Yeah, so we know that in the modern day. But in the ancient world, they knew that gladiators did really, 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 really well with this fava bean diet, which was coincidentally nice and cheap. And they didn't just need the protein; they needed carbs, very, very, very heavy carbs in their diet, so that way they could have a layer of fat that would serve as a layer of padding that bled nicely. They weren't there to die. Gladiators generally survived the vast majority of their bouts unless something went wrong or the crowd was in a particularly vicious mood. The
So speaking of their
so yeah,
bouts, actually, let me just grab you
yeah,
for a second because this is something that I was wondering. So, for example, in the modern day, like the WWE and Raw and various wrestling groups, we all know that it's staged, right? You have a heel, you have a face, you have a guy that the
yeah,
audience likes, you have a guy that the audience hates. One guy is predetermined to win. Were
yeah.
gladiators the same way?
We don't know. That's not a very friendly, helpful answer, but it's the best answer we have. We don't know. We think that the bouts were either staged or they were kind of choreographed in a way beforehand. There was a referee in the arena in every single bout. So if you look at some of the mosaics or wall paintings of gladiator bouts, there's always a referee in the background. There's always a referee hanging around who would actually enforce the rules and make sure that no one lost their head. Ha ha ha. Um, but the
So,
but yeah, sorry.
I'm just kind of following my little train of thought here. Did you had mentioned earlier Amazonia versus Aquileia with
Yeah,
these gender bent gladiators who were acting out a story from the Iliad, right? Like
yeah.
Amazonia versus Achilles is like a story in the Iliad. Was that a common thing? Do we know if they like acted out like legendary stories? Like were they
Yeah,
like
so
plays but with swords?
yes. So one small correction on that. The Amazon Queen versus Achilles was actually in the work that Homer wrote, right? That was like the sequel to the Iliad that doesn't survive. It happened after Hector's death. Anyway, not important. But but did they act out scenes? We don't 100% know. We know that they recreated events, but we don't know if those were actually scripted or not. It doesn't seem like they were. So, like, we do have, for example, Amazonia and Aquileia both survived, which indicates that, like, either Aquileia won, Amazonia won, or it was a draw. Like, they fought until, the crowd was delighted. The referee was like, okay, we're good. Both of them are bleeding nicely. Go home. Next bout. Closer to MMA in a way than necessarily pro wrestling, but maybe with a flavor of pro wrestling. Again, we don't necessarily know, but what we do know is that they played characters. So again, you have your gender
Okay.
bent
Yeah.
Aquileia and Amazonia, and then there's another reference in Juvenal to a woman who was a gender bent Heracles who killed the quote unquote Nemean lion. So they brought a lion into the arena, and you have this woman who's dressed up as Heracles, probably no shirt, long loincloth, maybe a club, maybe a net. Um, and she faced off against the lion and she won.
So really
And
quickly, just a slight
yeah,
diversion. Who was Juvenal? Just like for our audience.
yes. So Juvenal was a Roman poet, and he was famous for writing something called the Satires, which self-explanatory. It's not necessarily meant to be taken seriously, but you can take it as a comment on Roman society from a certain perspective. So it's a really useful source if you remember that it is a perspective, and it's kind of like if you think of what historians 300 years in the future might think of Twitter trolls, right?
Hmm.
They commentary on society, but a lot of what they say is to get a reaction. It's not necessarily literal or true or etc. It's something said to get a reaction from a certain point of view. And I really, really like describing Roman poets in general as Twitter users slash trolls because that is the best modern analog in some ways.
Okay. Really quickly, we do have some audience questions, and then we're going to be closing out our Chris portion, and we will be moving on to Christina. So
Absolutely.
I have a couple questions here. So, um, where did legionaries take vacations? What did they do in their free time?
That's another really excellent question, actually. We should do an episode on that. We should
I
do an
don't know if
episode
we
on
can
that. Maybe
talk
we could
about
do.
prostitutes on YouTube.
I would love to talk about suits on YouTube, but I don't know if we can. Um, the Roman soldiers actually did take leave. The thing is, we have surviving army records, mostly from like northern Britain, where it's nice boggy ground that actually preserves records that were written. So from there, we can kind of glean that when you have a garrisoned legion, about 20% of the legion, give or take, was out of commission for one reason or another. That reason might have been they were sick, like there were a whole bunch of people in hospital at any given time. Um, and then there were a whole bunch of people who took leave, and that leave could take them, like there's a guy, I believe it was from Windalanda, I'm not sure, but he went down to North Africa, and you have letters going back and forth and in between. Basically what they'd have to do is they would have to probably bribe their commanding officer to be like, oh yeah, no, I want to go, maybe to my wife's birthday in a few months, can I maybe get that? And they might get it, they might not. The more money they hypothetically didn't bribe their commander with, the bigger the chance they would be able to get their leave that they wanted. But yeah, no, so Roman soldiers would absolutely go on vacation, and off-duty Roman soldiers were infamous for being gigantic troublemakers that the locals didn't really want to deal with.
I don't think that's changed in the modern day either. Pretty sure that tends to be the perception. Soldiers have always been troublemakers.
Soldiers are always troublemakers.
And
Some of
let's
my best
see.
friends are soldiers. No, but and
And
what was the second part of that question?
the second part of that question, I mean, that was it. Did they go to strip clubs? Is
Did
one of the
did Roman
part that
soldiers go to strip clubs? That's
I left that one out, but that is the second
I will
half of the
make this
question.
safe for work and keep it nice and academic-y because I don't know how angry the YouTube algorithm will be if I get too far into it. But short answer is the Roman equivalent, absolutely, 100%. So camp followers around these basically, if you think of Roman fortresses as a big Roman camp, that Roman camp became permanent, and so they built it up with stone. So that Roman camp becomes a fortress, and a fortress with like 20,000 dudes in it is a great place for people to come make money because the Roman government is putting so much money into this area. Oh, hey, look, a city magically forms. And camp followers weren't necessarily allowed inside the walls, but they could absolutely set up camp outside the walls. And, soldiers are really bad at doing laundry. So laundry women are there. And oh, wow, it's like 20,000 men. A lot of those men might want female company, so there are a whole ton of prostitutes outside the walls. And there's, the soldiers who weren't necessarily allowed to get married, but they had air quote wives who aren't necessarily legally married and they don't have legal children until they're out of the military. But they absolutely were outside the walls. Some of them slept in the barracks, depending on how lenient your centurion was. But so these cities would form up outside the walls of the legionary fortress, and they would eventually just turn into just straight up large cities just because of that military presence there.
That's
So
really
long
cool.
story short, legionaries absolutely went to the Roman equivalent of strip clubs, and they used a whole, keeping it safe for work, they used most of their money on women in those cities.
Okay, and we have one other question that I'm going to hit, and this one is kind of to all of our researchers. But I have a question. Did anyone besides Carthage ever really challenge Rome during that early time period, like during the Punic Wars? So who were the other major powers in the Mediterranean in the, first century BC or so? So I guess that would be a
Sorry,
Vaughn
hold on,
question?
I'm just fixing my mic.
No problem. To fill the silence, personally, I don't know. I think. So let's
Actually, why don't you move on to another question while I fix this? I just ran into technical difficulties.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Okay,
I
cool.
can actually
anything.
I actually saw another question on stream. Can I go ahead and steal it?
You may, but you've taken up so much of the time. Make it quick.
I know.
No,
I'll make
it's
it quick.
okay. Do it.
The question is about tacky souvenirs, and it's just a quick side note on my favorite souvenir that we've ever found from the Roman world is actually a stylus. So essentially a pencil with no lead. It's just a wooden stick that you use to scribe in a wax tablet or something. And on that stylus is written, if you sideways translate it just a little bit, it translates to, "I went to Rome and all I got you was this crappy stylus."
You're kidding me.
I am not kidding you. It's my favorite tacky souvenir.
That's awesome.
All right.
That's
I have fixed my technical difficulties. I'm so sorry about that. As soon as you asked me, my mic just went dead.
It's okay. Our entire stream just kind of died for like 5 minutes earlier, so that's really minor.
All right. Okay, so the question was about if anybody challenged Carthage in the same time period.
Who was challenging? I believe they were challenging. Did anyone besides Carthage
challenged Rome?
Yeah, challenge Rome.
Yeah, there are plenty of so Carthage is the big easiest one to point to because they basically start a world war more or less. When we're talking about the world that people know at that time, that's essentially what the Second Punic War is. So that's the big one. But if you look slightly beforehand, there are plenty of challenges to Rome's power and also afterward. Now, the period after the Punic Wars is known as the period where all the Roman authors they point to it as we have no enemies left, so we're going to degrade, morally and socially.
There's no equals left on the pond.
Yeah. That's everybody loves to point to that. But there were challenges to their authority directly before it. The best one I can think of is the Samnites. The Samnites were always a pain in the butt for Rome up until they were finally beaten to the dust. So they had problems. And directly afterward, I think probably the biggest threat to Rome's power would have been the Social War, which is essentially where all of Rome's allies just decided to revolt.
It's very interesting because we use the word ally, and you don't think of an ally as revolting against another power. You would think that an ally would break an alliance. So I get the
Yeah,
feeling
yeah.
that the Roman use of the word ally might not be what we think of as an ally today. More like a
Yeah,
vassal?
it's a good point. It's really more of a vassal. Technically, the allies are in treaty with Rome, and to the same effect, Carthage has allies like this too. They're in treaty with Rome or with Carthage, and ostensibly, they make these treaties initially either under duress or sometimes not, but eventually they will like Rome will impose more things onto their allies, and they'll become more of like vassals, right?
So
That's
what sort
that's
of
really what it
things
is.
would they be imposing? I know this is kind of an unfair question because you're not a Roman
No,
historian.
no, this is fine. I'm also a military historian, but largely, I mean, they're different based on different city states, right? So Rome is negotiating specific treaties with specific cities and whatnot. Originally, at least, a lot of what they want is manpower. It's the same with Carthage. So you may have noticed in the Carthage videos that Carthage's armies are filled up to the brim with mercenaries and with non-Carthaginian people, so like Libyans.
And we're actually
It's
going to talk about that later.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll talk about that later. But that's a lot of that. That's a lot of the worth the Allies need to provide to Rome. Lots of manpower. So up in the time of Polybius, I believe 50% of Roman armies were allied city-states, which is a lot of people.
That is a lot of people. But I think we're going to close out this early Roman portion and move to our middle Roman portion with Dr. Christina Hotalen, who is one of the newest members of our team. She's our social media manager, and she's also one of our new primary researchers. Hi, Christina.
Hello. Hello.
So
So
I have
happy to be here.
it's nice to have you here. Um, Obviously, we don't have any prepared patron questions for you because your first episode, Roman Empresses, is coming out sometime next week. Uh,
Yes.
so in that case, I'm gonna ask a little bit about you and what you study. So what did you get your PhD in?
So I got my PhD in history, specializing in Roman history, um, doing a little bit of digital humanities with some gender, material culture, and cultural history. Um, so Yeah. So I earned my PhD in 2020, the year of the pandemic,
Mhm.
and that was really fun. But ultimately, I specialized in my dissertation investigated the role of imperial women from the late second to third century.
And we'll be
Um,
covering some of that in Roman Empresses, right?
Yes, we'll be covering aspects of it, just because that video is going to cover the Julio-Claudian empresses first, as the first empresses of Rome.
So which
Whereas
Empresses did you study?
I studied mostly Julia Domna, the wife of Septimius Severus, Octacilla Severa, the wife of Philip the Arab, and Galeria Valeria, the daughter of Diocletian, who was also the wife of Galerius.
And so these are all those are all third century crisis names, right? Like that's when Rome was seriously in flux.
Julia Domna predates the third century crisis. She's in the later, like the late second century. Um, so actually it's it's her niece. Yes, technically it is her niece. These family trees are like when you're doing it from head, they just mind boggle you. But yeah, so it's actually her niece who is the last Severan empress, who is like the last empress before like the poo hits the fan, so to speak, with
Keeping it a little
Rome.
PG. So the
Yeah.
Severan dynasty. So the ending of the Severan dynasty is what begins the third century crisis. How did the Severan dynasty begin? Who was Septimius Severus?
So Septimius Severus was he's actually from North Africa, and he was, I believe, if my memory serves me well, he was one of the he was commanding one of the Roman legions, and he was proclaimed emperor following the assassination of Pertinax. The problem was that he was one of three rivals for the throne at this point.
Who else?
So back in Rome, I'm sorry.
I was just who else was up as a candidate, I suppose.
Yeah. So there was Didius Julianus, who was proclaimed emperor back in Rome. He only lasted about 9 weeks.
What happened to old Didius? What a great name, by the way.
I know, right? He was actually so Septimius Severus was actually on his way to Rome, and sort of have like a showdown, and he met no resistance along the way. Like he actually won a lot of support from other people along the way. So things are going really well for Septimius Severus, but Didius Julianus is taken out by the Praetorian troops.
So before Severus even gets there.
Yeah, exactly. But needless to say, so aside from Didius Julianus, there was also Piscinius Niger. He was the governor of Syria, and he was also proclaimed emperor in the east. And then there was Clodius Albinus, who was the governor of Britain. And in order, so he had these two other guys that he had to take out, so to speak. And because you could only focus your attention on one thing at a time, he essentially got Clodius Albinus to be his Caesar, which essentially meant that they would be like sort of co-emperors.
So he kind of made a peace treaty. He's like, I'm not going all the way up to Britain. I've got a more dangerous guy to deal with. So you can hang.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like one of those wink wink nudge nudge things. Like, yeah, you'll be my Caesar, they'll be fine.
Sure,
so they both
totally.
take down so that they could both take down Piscinius Niger. So eventually he's eliminated. And Severus then turns his attention towards booting out Clodius Albinus while fortifying his own claim to the throne through his own propaganda campaign.
So what does ancient propaganda look like? I know like modern propaganda, it's in the form of like videos, newspapers, books, that sort of thing. But what did it look like back then?
Imperial propaganda took the form of like state inscriptions, and anything that was erected or funded by the imperial government, the emperor. It was definitely coinage for sure. Imperial coinage was like the most effective form of disseminating propaganda, as I argue.
So what does so a coin like can't contain much. Like that's just got to be like a face and an inscription. So what can you get across in like just like a gold denarius?
Well, I guess before I really delve into that, I should make the disclaimer that like when I use propaganda in this context, I don't necessarily mean like 19th century totalitarian propaganda, where in imperial propaganda is intended to convey a narrative about the emperor or whoever in the best positive light. So it's not necessarily intended to be misleading or anything, but it's a set of narratives that that the emperor that makes the emperor look good and his family essentially.
So imperial propaganda is the reason we have so many emperors who are rendered with six-packs. Like that sort of thing. We just need to make them look good.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely presenting an image of themselves. They're projecting like an image. So, who's to say that these are like really accurate portraits? I mean, especially with Augustus, who looks the same in all his portraits,
Mm-hmm. And Augustus was a master.
I'm sorry, what was?
I was just wondering, like,
Yeah.
I was just wondering what imperial propaganda looked like on a coin. Like, so it's just a face and an inscription. So it would be like Septimius Severus and just a handsome face that hopefully looks like Severus.
I mean, it would be like a handsome profile view of the emperor with Septimius Severus Augustus Imperator on the obverse of the coin. And then on the reverse side of it, you would have a legend that could say, I mean, it could be anything. So with Septimius Severus, I mean, we see so much coinage under his reign that, like, I mean, one example I can think of is a gold coin of Septimius Severus on the obverse of it, and on the reverse, it is it's a portrait of his family. And so on either side of the coin, looking in profile view, you have Caracal and Gada, and they're looking directly at the center, and the center figure is Julia Domna, who is looking, frontal view, which is a really rare numismatic portrait.
So-
You can think of it like the Uncle Sam, I want you in war. That's that sort of pose that she's in.
Interesting.
The frontal.
And Julia Domina is Septimius Severus's wife, right?
Yes, and so the legend on the reverse side of that coin translates to the blessings of the generation. And what that essentially means is that, like, it legitimizes Caracal and Gada as the future, co-emperors, and that this is, that Septimius Severus is establishing his dynasty, and that they are going to be the ruling dynasty. And,
So he was trying to secure the succession, like, the moment he took the throne, he was securing the succession through coinage and, like, by portraying his wife as, like, kind of holy, right? Like, very pious, very good. Like, of course she's the mother of the next emperor. She's great.
Yeah, like, they're definitely attributing a lot of the good like the esteemed virtues and qualities that would be expected of, a woman of such high distinction, especially. And so her chastity, her pudicitia, her pudor, all that stuff was really advertised. And I mean, it was basically essentially what Marcus Aurelius did with his wife Faustina, which is how Septimius Severus was legitimizing himself. He had the support of the military, yes, but he also made attempts to tie himself in with the Antonine dynasty. And so
just really quickly, I'm a medievalist. I know nothing. Who are the Antonines?
I'm sorry. So the Antonines are Marcus Aurelius, Lucius Verus. Am I getting that? I don't know why I'm having a brain fart.
I know who Marcus Aurelius is. We can kind of his dynasty.
Yeah, that's that dynasty. And I mean, it technically starts with Antoninus Pius, but I mean, typically it starts with Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius is cooler. It's true.
Yeah.
He has a big beard.
So one of the first things Severus did was change his son's name from Lucius Septimius Bassianus to his grandfather's name, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, also known as Caracalla. So Caracalla, had a different name before, Septimius started to really ramp up this propaganda campaign for legitimizing himself. But when it came to his wife, Julia Domna, he awarded her a slew of titles, one of them being the Mater Castrorum. And one of the reasons why I suspect this title was awarded for Julia Domna was the same reason Marcus Aurelius had awarded it to Faustina, which was to encourage the belief that the imperial domus and the military shared an intimate familial relationship. And it essentially guaranteed a smooth dynastic succession.
So you said Mater Castrorum. What does that translate to, just real quick?
That translates to mother of the camps.
So these are like military camps.
Yeah, like soldiers. So that title, it implies that there's like this close, warm, fuzzy relationship with the emperor and the military.
So like the military is kind of part of his family through that title?
In a way, yeah. Like they're sort of adopted into the fold.
I have so many sons. Look at them.
Yes, these are my children. But it was also just another. I mean, that title, like so many other titles, it just served to bind Julia Domina and Faustina, thus the Severins and the Antonines. But there was also the pamphlets published by Cassius Dio on the dreams and omens that Septimius Severus purportedly experienced.
So really
And,
quickly, before we get to the dreams and omens, I did have a question.
yeah.
Who was Severus trying to convince? Because, like, obviously it would have to be people who knew about the Antonine dynasty. Would the common people have really, like, sensed a difference other than a new face on the coins? Or was this more targeted at, like, nobility and people of power?
Definitely aimed at people in power, for sure. I mean, they're definitely having to appeal to the Senate, for sure. Especially when it came to, like, dispelling rumors of Gada and Caracalla, not getting along. I mean, those rumors ran pretty rampantly out the palace, apparently.
Well, it's because
So
they
there was
didn't get
that.
along, right?
Yeah, I mean, and if they didn't get along, then how can these two, effectively rule and keep some semblance of balance and power? Um, so yeah, and so there's actually a lot of coins that that Julia Domina has minted for her, and they show her as the goddess Pietas,
So she had the
sprinkling the
coins minted
incense over.
herself? Like, she ordered them?
No, no, no. They were just minted under Septimius Severus, but they had her portrait. That's what I
Gotcha,
should have said.
gotcha.
Um, so yeah, she's depicted as the goddess Pietas, just throwing incense over the altar with the legend of peace right above it. To basically show that don't worry, things are okay. Mom's on scene, and there is order in the house, and therefore, because I mean, there was the idea of if the emperor couldn't control his family or his wife, especially, how could he exert control anywhere else in the public sphere?
That makes
Um,
sense.
so yeah, they pushed her motherly attributes and virtues so much because of that. Especially when it came to the rumors of Gada and Caracalla, because I mean anything that could, somewhat dull the veneer of what they had been trying to establish as a, peaceful, happy family. Well,
We're totally not in, like, a massive civil war. It's just like how everyone keeps yelling that we're not in a recession. It's peace, it's peace. It's peaceful altar,
I
peaceful
mean,
lady.
yeah, I forget who wrote it, but there was a passage about, Caracalla and Gada like literally splitting everything in the palace like in half.
I'll,
And
like,
at one
draw a
point,
line down the middle of the room. This is your half, this is
yeah,
my
and
half.
Julia Domina, in very dramatic fashion, says, "And what shall you do with me? Split me in half too?" And that somehow like quelled the boys and got them like, okay, I guess we're acting kind of crazy. I mean, it didn't last long, but yeah.
So back to your actual train of thought. You were talking about dreams and omens?
Yeah, so Septimius Severus purportedly had these dreams and omens, and essentially they just emphasized the deep connections between himself and the Antonines, and they offered evidence of divine sanction for Septimius Severus's reign.
So
Because
do we know what the omens were? Like, did the emperors come and speak to him in his sleep and go, "You're one of us"? Or
um they weren't like that, at least not the ones. No, they definitely weren't like that. If anything, I mean, it's basically they are preparing the bridal chamber before their wedding. So Marcus Aurelius and Faustina are there preparing for, well, mostly Faustina appears as preparing the nuptial chamber before Julia Domina and Septimius Severus get married. And Faustina takes
oh,
on the role of the pronuba, which was occupied usually by the mother of the bride. So it was useful in highlighting those connections between the two dynasties as being like one of fate and, all that.
I totally didn't
Fascinating
just kill
stuff.
my way to get here.
Yeah.
It was all fate.
Yeah, I mean, basically, like, I mean, this was a man who, you know, had the support of the military and was a soldier emperor almost. And he had to soften up that reception, and win the support of people. And, he had to do what he had to do. And so he used his family to his advantage and he was successful with it.
So I'm going to take a break from our prepared questions for just a moment because we have so many interesting audience questions that like I've just been staring at for the past couple of minutes.
Oh dear.
So we've got one who was like, who was the most influential Roman woman? Helena, which I assume is the mother of Constantine, Julia Agrippina, or someone else? Um, that's a bit of a broad question, but if you can give us some influential women, that'd be cool.
Yeah, that is kind of a broad question. I mean, certainly Livia deserves credit as being the first empress and being, like, I don't know if paragon is the right word for this, but she was definitely a model empress that a lot of empresses modeled themselves after or attempted to emulate in some way.
So she was
Uh,
Augustus's wife, right?
yes, she was Augustus's third wife, I believe. It's you know what? Watch the video on Roman empresses. It's
Yeah.
gonna be awesome.
It'll be really good. We cover it then. So
Yeah. So I mean, there's Livia, definitely Agrippina the Younger. I mean, that woman was remarkable. She gets a really bad rep in the sources, but I'm gonna go out and just come out as an Agrippina stan and just say that I mean, she wrote her own autobiography. Like she wrote it in the way that Julius Caesar wrote his Gallic Wars, which
do
is
we
a
have
really
that?
interesting. We don't have it. That's the problem.
No.
I know. I know. This is the case of studying women, or I mean, even imperial women. It's not any better.
Yeah.
Um,
So who
but
was Agrippina the Younger?
she was Claudius's fourth wife and mother of Nero. Um,
That's an
I don't want.
unfortunate place to be, I must say.
I know, but man, was she a firecracker! I mean, that woman was awesome. I hope
What?
other people will understand and appreciate that when the Roman Empress's video comes out, because there's definitely a section on her, and I don't want to spoil too much.
Okay. Then in that case, we'll step away from Agrippina Younger. Or
But I mean, Julia Domina was very influential too. I mean, this was a woman who was handling Caracala's responses at one point he when he became solo emperor. But,
so she was like handling his correspondence, like writing letters on his behalf, that sort of thing.
yeah, apparently she was, taking care of those correspondences, and there's an inscription in her voice, forget where, but it's in Turkey somewhere, and it's got her inscription where she is speaking directly to the Ephesians, and then underneath that is Caracala's speech,
Oh wow, so
to the
it's her first and then Caracalla. That's interesting.
yeah. There's a triumphal arch to Julia Domina as well. I was actually looking into that when I was writing my dissertation, and then I don't know if it's been written on or something, but there's just so many.
Third questions, just as a quick moment.
Yeah.
We stopped at dreams and coinage. So when Septimius Severus dies, right? Did it work out? Did he manage to secure the succession?
I mean, he did ish for a little bit. That arrangement of Caracalla and Gada being co-emperors didn't last no more than a year.
I mean, co-emperors very rarely work
Because,
out.
well, yes, but especially when we're talking about Caracal and Gada, who are talking about splitting everything in the palace, and only stopped because mom got involved and said, "What are you doing? Like you're acting crazy." Um, so yeah, basically, December 26th. I forget the year now. But essentially, Caracal ordered the murder of Gada. And according to Cassius Dio, Caracal tricked his mother into hosting a meeting to negotiate a peace between himself and Gada. At Caracal's signal, a Satyrian leapt out from behind a tapestry and slaughtered Gada as he clung onto his mother's neck, begging her to save him. And in that process, Julia Domina sustains a sort of flesh wound, a cut from that. So things got pretty serious, and he forbade her from being able to publicly mourn, to really show any sort of like grieving for it. It was really dramatic, and
So she wasn't allowed to mourn the death of her son, and she also took a wound trying to prevent the murder?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she got cut in the process. It was her hand, I believe. But yeah, she was not allowed to publicly mourn the loss of her son. And basically, like, I think Caracal definitely understood the error of his way afterwards, and people were not thrilled about it. So, I mean, that's when Caracalla, makes, basically empire-wide citizenship for everyone.
Hey, I killed my brother. You're a citizen now.
Yeah, and, we're gonna just do all these things. I'm gonna let mom take care of, the correspondences and, handle that, that branch of the government. And I'm just gonna dilly-dally with soldiers.
Well, I mean, securing the support of the army is very important to a Roman emperor. Like,
well,
they need
yes,
that.
and Septimius Severus did make the point to say, going on, basically it was take care of the soldiers, no matter what. And they certainly did. I mean, those soldiers were paid very, very well. Caracal was very much, he was more of a soldier than he was, an emperor, really. I mean, Gada was much better at the administrative stuff. He was usually in the tent hanging out and learning things like behind the scenes, whereas Caracal could usually be out with the boys.
Really quickly, we've gotten some super chats, so I should totally give them a shout out. So from Charlie Spur, I think some emperors would have had no problem splitting their wives in half. I'm gonna take that in an execution type fashion, and we're not gonna delve into what else that could mean. And we there were definitely some murderous emperors, and that's how I choose to interpret that statement, Charlie.
I mean, there were some empresses that were executed in damnatio memoriae, but that's a conversation for another day.
And we also have a super chat from Skelly Bulldozer, who's asking, what if Caesar survived part 4 when? It's coming. I can promise you that. It is coming soon. It is on the schedule. What if Caesar survived? We're going to wrap that series up. Promise.
Gonna be great.
It's gonna be so good. I honestly, I don't know. That's not a project that I... Huh?
There's actually gonna be an ending.
There's gonna be an ending. Yeah. You should all join. You should all become patrons and get on Discord and ping Chris relentlessly, because he is the one who is organizing that. So if you want Caesar 4, you should just bother him.
He's got nothing else to do. It's totally fine.
It's true. He's not doing anything.
It's true. 100%.
he's
not a single lie has ever been told on this stream.
Yeah, we're telling citation needed. We're telling the truth.
Trust us.
Trust us. We're historians.
We're trustworthy. We're absolutely trustworthy. So I think that was everything that we have for Roman empresses. Is there anything else you wanted to cover while you've got the soapbox?
I mean, I could always talk about material culture.
That would be pretty cool, actually, because I don't know what that means. What is material culture?
So, material culture is the study of cultural meanings embedded within objects. So, typically, like, we investigate why things were made, they took on the forms that they did, and the purposes they fulfilled. And it's really useful for studying people or communities who left no written records or where none survive. So, at least in my case, with studying women in antiquity, that's where material culture really comes in handy because, like the Agrippina autobiography just doesn't exist anymore. And a lot of the sources overwhelmingly are pretty hostile to imperial women. So that's where I like to look at the material culture in conjunction with the literary sources and all that.
So how do you examine material culture? Like what this sounds like to me, I think archaeology with what you're describing. So you're looking at like physical objects and then placing them and dating them and figuring out where they were made and where they ended up,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is based in anthropology. I mean, this developed alongside of it. And like anthropologists, archaeologists, anyone that works like museum people especially, this is where that sort of study of analysis really comes in handy. And I mean, there's really no quote unquote scholarly doctrine on how to study material culture. Um, I mean, you just need to, examine all the evidence that proceeds from the discovery, identification, and the classification of the material culture to having a thoughtful analysis and interpretation of these artifacts in the cultural context.
so you need to be familiar enough with like the literature surrounding this piece and like where it's located and who was writing at the time and what they were writing about, and then we can kind of like through conjecture learn about them.
Yeah, yeah, that's one way to do it for sure. I mean, at least when I was looking at dolls and figurines that were modeled after empresses, I sort of had to think like a Roman child or like a Roman teenager and think questions about like, why would this, child have gotten this gift or for what purpose would that serve? And I just drew upon a lot of questions from there and just, made some thoughtful interpretations and analysis. And, that's all I can do. I mean, I can't say for certain, but I can at least come up with theories on why these things existed and what they meant to someone.
So you said dolls of empresses. I guess it's not surprising that they made like figurines of like their monarchs and stuff. But were those common? Do we have
I
like
do that. There aren't that many. I mean, which is sort of unfortunate. I mean, when I last looked at this stuff, I believe there were a couple hundred figurines, but as far as ones that look like Roman empresses, there aren't that many. And that could be for various reasons. Maybe they just got destroyed because of the material in which they were made with, or they got lost. It's hard to say why these things don't survive in greater number, but at least the ones that I examined, I looked at ones that looked like Faustina the Younger and Elder. And there was one more doll. Yeah, that was Julia Domna. And so those are the three dolls that I looked at specifically.
that's pretty cool. I've always been like I'm a medievalist, so I'm incredibly spoiled. I get to use mostly literary sources for my work. Monks are the best in that they write everything down, except when
Yeah.
they add their own notes or mess up a word and completely change the meaning of a text. For ex- I'm actually going to take this moment to talk just a little bit. Like for example, in Josephus's Jewish Wars, there's a massive paragraph section. Like Josephus was writing his history around the time that Jesus was alive, and he has one throwaway sentence. And he was like, and there was a guy who might have been called the Christ, and the verb that he used like expresses extreme doubt, who may or may not have been doing some stuff over here while I was doing other things. And then like a book later, there is several pages, like eight paragraphs dedicated to like praising Jesus. And you look at that and you're like, that's not the language that Josephus used. That's not written how he uses it. So we're pretty sure that like a monk came in and was transcribing Josephus's wars, and he was like, there's not enough Jesus in this book, so they just kind of added stuff, which
Oh my goodness.
I thought that was pretty cool, and I just wanted to mention it while I've got my chance on stream.
Oh, I love that.
And now for our final segment, I believe it's going to be Vaughn once again with the Carthaginian Navy. Because there is a lot of stuff about Sicily that I want to study. Well, not necessarily study. I want to make Vaughn study it for me and then tell me about it on stream.
Yeah, that's my job, so don't worry.
So let's start with a source discussion about the Sicilian Wars and the Carthaginian Navy. So, like, how do we know all of the stuff that we say in our videos?
Yeah, so just to give a shout out here to a couple of secondary sources that I'm a big fan of. Carthage's Other Wars by Dexter Hoyos is affordable. It's a great book, and it gives attention to things that often don't get attention. But the other big ones are like Carthage Must Be Destroyed by Richard Miles, Carthage: A History by Lancel, and Ancient Mariners by Chester Starr is a classic. So there are lots of good secondary sources, but all of these, of course, pull from the primary sources. And the most important ones for our purposes about Carthage are Justin, Diodorus, and Polybius. And you may have heard of some of them, maybe not. The problem is, you'll see as we talk about them more, they're all very problematic. So for the Romans, we have plenty of sources that were written during the time that the events happened. For the Carthaginians, we pretty much don't. So Justin is, for instance, Justin is a Roman, and he's from the 2nd century CE.
I was about to
He
say
lived in
Justin
Gaul.
sounds like a really late name.
Yes, yeah, he's not of the period, and yet he is essentially our only source on early Carthage. So anything before like the before like the Sicilian Wars, I would say. And that's obviously a problem, right? He's writing several hundred years past the events that he's talking about. And he himself also was basically abridging a copy of Pompeius Trogus, who was a previous historian, which means that not only is Justin writing about things that he is not acquainted with, but he's not even really writing about them. He's just abridging somebody else's words. So obviously problems there. Nevertheless, I don't know, some of the things that Justin says are interesting. He gets names wrong a lot. He has a lot of problems. He has a lot of incorrect things. But
How do we
it could
know
be worse,
that he got it wrong if he's our primary source?
Well, it's for his periods when he talks about like the Sicilian Wars, for example, he will often get the names of Carthaginians wrong. So I'm sure you know that Carthaginians all share like a similar host of names. It's Hamilcar or Hannibal or Hasdrubal, right? They kind of recycle, specifically the nobility will recycle names a lot. And Justin will consistently mix up these names. So if you follow Justin, you'll get completely different names for Diodorus. And that's, some of that is just like extrapolating. People say, okay, well, if he can't get his names right, then he has to get some other information wrong too. But that's not to say he's a garbage source. He's basically our only source. So we have to we have to concentrate.
I was about to say, it sounds like he is garbage, but we don't have a choice.
Yes, basically that's the deal. Now, I will say I like Justin. I like him for what he gives us. He gives us some interesting stuff. And a lot of it is just like he'll say something and it's clear that there was more in Trogus than what we got from Justin, but he'll write it in a sentence or two, which is unfortunate, but at least Justin gave us that. At least he did what he did,
Yeah, I mean, at least we have it.
Yeah, at least we have it. Moving on, the best source is probably Diodorus Siculus. He's a Sicilian Greek writing under the Roman Empire from the 1st century BCE. And he's basically the main source for the Sicilian Wars. He's sort of for that reason, he's biased towards the Sicilian Greeks, obviously. But he gives a lot of information and he wrote a lot of stuff. He is probably one of the most underrated historians that I can think of. He just wrote so much about Sicily and the Carthaginians and the Greeks in Sicily and the Romans, and yet nobody seems to read him. So kind of strange. But he's a really good source. He talks a lot about what's going on and how it's affecting things.
So
And then, of course, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, is he like the main primary that we draw on for our videos? Like when we talk about the political situation in Sicily and the ethnic Sicilians and the like governments of Syracuse, is that mostly Diodorus?
Well, in this case, actually, I forgot to mention I do use Herodotus too. Herodotus is a classic, but he doesn't talk that much about Carthage, so I use him somewhat sparingly. But in the case of your question, so we'll get to later talking about Gelon and Theron, and he actually is the source. Herodotus, that is the source for Gelon and Theron. Not so much Diodorus Siculus, I believe, but in most other matters, yeah, he's the source that he would be the one who I checked first. You know.
Mm-hmm. So
We've got. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is that all of our sources? Because we've got a ton of questions to get through for the Carthaginians.
Yeah, we've got. I'll roll through the next ones. We've got Polybius, right? Polybius is my favorite historian ever, but he's also writing from the 2nd century BCE. He cares about the Punic Wars. If you haven't read him, he is a fantastic read in a lot of ways. And then we've got Polyaenus, who we will talk about later. I've already posted a bit of him in the chat, but he basically just wrote a bunch of little witticisms about tactical and strategic historical moments that we can pull from.
Yeah, what you
as I
posted
mentioned,
in what you posted in the
yeah,
chat, it seems that his tactical advice is to lie, and to lie a
yeah,
lot.
basically, yeah, he goes through a lot of different like supposed historical stories about what different leaders did, and there's one for every great leader, at least one for every great leader in ancient history. So he goes through a lot of them. It's just whether they're truthful or whether we can actually use them, you know?
That's still pretty cool.
Yeah.
Lying.
And then, yeah. And then of course, as I mentioned earlier, for ships, we have to use a lot of outside sources. So for like manpower, we need to use Athenian and Rhodian sources. Since there are essentially no sources that tell us about how Carthage specifically crewed its ships, we're just going to extrapolate those numbers, which is fine because it's probably correct, or at least almost entirely correct. But we can't say exactly for sure that it translates.
Yeah, we could just kind of guess. I mean, if I've learned anything from researching naval episodes and boats, is that there was almost no standardization in ship construction during this time period. Yeah. Like, we say that there are classes of ships, but, like, not really.
Yeah. Yeah, except for the Carthaginians, who, if you watch the videos, you know that they kind of use, like, a proto-assembly line system, or more of, like, an IKEA system, if you will. So there's some sort of standardization there. But across, like, different powers, yeah, I mean, not everybody is coming to a big meeting and deciding we're all going to build our ships up like this, so...
Mm-hmm. So, bouncing forward to our questions, and these are all going to be in chronological order. And so not necessarily in the order in which they appear in the video, but I personally wanted to know who Prince Dorius was. You mention him in the Punic Sicilian Wars. He tries to found a failed Spartan colony.
Yeah.
What's the deal there? There aren't a lot of Spartan colonies, are there?
Yeah, Prince Dorius is it's a good question. He's sort of a lesser known figure, and he could have been so much bigger. It's part of why he's interesting. There are a couple of Spartan colonies, but he essentially, and if you want to figure out this information, he's in Herodotus 5.41 to 48. But he was a Spartan prince, so he was born to this guy named Anaxandrides the second. This particular Spartan ruler, he had a wife, and he was forced by the ephors, right? So like the Spartan governing body, to take a second wife, because he couldn't have children with his first wife. And then with his second wife, he had a son named Cleomenes, who would go on to lead Sparta from 524 to 490. Or sorry, with his I believe with his second wife it's Cleomenes, and then he goes back to his first wife, and he has Dorius Leonidas, who I'm sure you've all heard of,
Oh, that
and
Leonidas?
Cleomerotus. That Leonidas, yes. So essentially, what we have here is Dorius is the second in line for the Spartan throne. Eventually, it will go to Cleomenes, and Dorius kind of gets pissed off at this. And he asks the Spartans for his own force of Spartan colonists to kind of he does okay, well, if you're not going to give me a city, I'm going to make my own.
Yeah, I'll go be king somewhere else if you guys aren't
Yeah.
gonna let me be king here.
Yeah, exactly. And the first place he goes is he lands at a place called he takes his ship, he takes his colonists, and he lands at a place called the River Knips. It's called modernly it's called the Wadi Qum River in Libya. And that's essentially at like a midway point between Carthage and Cyrene. So not super close to Carthage, but still a problem. And in the third year, eventually, a Carthaginian, Libyan, and local force will band together, kick them out, and then burn down his city. So he goes back to Sparta.
We're not having these
Um,
Spartans in our backyard.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a little bit. Again, it's not right next door to Carthage, so it's interesting that the Carthaginians are involved in this. It tells us something about how far the Carthaginians are willing to go to kind of control their territory or kick people out, right? It's almost midway between Cyrene and Carthage.
Yeah, that's out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. But he didn't give up, so he goes back to Sparta, and then this time he asks the oracles, where should I go? And they tell him he should go to Mount Eryx in Sicily this time. Which, as if you know anything about Sicilian geography, Mount Eryx is like firmly within Carthaginian, or not Carthaginian, Punic, so Phoenician at the time, controlled Sicily. And so he tries to establish a colony there again. And this is where he comes up in the video. On his way, he may have helped sack Sybaris. You can read more about that in Herodotus if you want. But at any rate, he comes to Eryx. He tries to set up another colony, and he gets his butt absolutely kicked, just handed to him by Phoenicians and Agestans.
So these Phoenicians
if you wanna
aren't
call them that.
Carthaginians. This is a different, they're associated with a different power.
Yeah, it's probably so. There's the question, right? Is whether the Phoenicians who helped kick him out were associated with the Carthaginians, or whether they were just from Phoenician cities on the island. We're right around the time when we start seeing, again, this is like about 510. So we're right around the time when we start seeing Carthage push into Sicily. 480 is when we have their first definite historical, like certain invasion of Sicily. But then before that, we have Malchus coming into Sicily and maybe trying to assert some power there. So it's in between, and we really don't know if the Carthaginians are involved in this or if they're just Phoenicians who are helping to get rid of Dorius. I think because he had tried to set up a colony in Africa, there's a good chance that the Carthaginians were involved in some way, but it's not quite certain.
So, actually, who were the other Phoenician powers? Was anyone competing with Carthage during this time period? Were Tyre and Sidon still relevant?
Sort of. Tyre and Sidon are they're considered, especially Tyre is considered the mother city of Carthage, and throughout Carthage's lifetime, they were sending back tithes to Tyre, to keep good relations and sort of to pay homage to them. And then outside of Phoenicia, though, because the Phoenician cities, the actual cities in Phoenicia, they fall off sometime around. I think it's around maybe the 4th century, maybe earlier. But they start to fall off earlier, and Carthage will basically come into the Phoenician colonies and take over where Tyre was. So there are a lot of other big cities, big Phoenician cities across the Mediterranean. For instance, I mentioned Cadiz earlier. They're in Spain. They're a huge old city. And then within Sicily proper, we have Matia, which you may or may not have heard of, but Matia is another very big Phoenician city in Sicily. It's like probably the most major one. We have a city called Solus, which is also a Phoenician city, and then just generally other Phoenician colonies kind of dotting the area. So there are a lot of them. And
And
if
they're
you
all
ask
kind of
me,
independent.
yes, they're independent. And if you ask me, if you had Carthage suddenly coming in, it's sort of a toss up as to whether these Phoenician cities would be like, yeah, come on, come help us against the Greeks, or if they would be like, no, we want to kind of do our own thing. We don't want to be dominated by a city across the straits there.
Yeah,
So
we
it could go either way.
it's always dangerous to invite someone else's military into your land to solve your problems, as we
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But speaking of militaries in other people's lands, what about the native Sicilians? Like all of the people who were already living on the islands when these Greeks and Phoenicians like show up and start bickering with each other. Who were they? And I
That's
think
an awesome question.
you've got a nice map
Um,
for this. Look at our
yeah, I think I
handiwork,
built
guys.
one earlier, but um, that's an awesome question. It's not one that's talked about a lot, but it's kind of important. My You can take a look at my little painted map there. But there are generally three native Sicilian peoples. I'm using that term loosely because there is fluidity. There are people moving back and forth. But before the Greeks and the Phoenicians come, we have the Elimoi, the Sakanoi, and the Sakeloi. Um, and the Sakanoi are supposed to be the original natives of Sicily, so probably the people who were living there when all the other people came. They are said to have made their villages on hills, farmed the land, moved inland for safety eventually. And we're told that that's because of volcanoes and pirates and the other people moving in to try and take their land.
So they were kind
Um,
of pushed out by like not only
yeah,
natural pressures, but like presumably slavers when they say
yeah,
pirates.
yeah, yeah. Supposedly, although we have to remember too that the guy who's telling us all this, which would be Diodorus Siculus, is born basically 1,000 years after this happened, and he may have no idea what he's talking about. The only thing we really know then for sure is that the Sicani did move inland into like the middle portions of Sicily. Um, the other two groups of people, the Elimians and the Sikeli, you know, just calling them by English now. The Elimians, they were supposedly the first group to move into Sicily from Italy, and they're probably Italic, based on their language. Not much has been studied of their language, but the things that we have of it, people say they're probably Italic. And they probably were involved in pushing the Sakanoi into the middle of the island. Same general point with the Sikeli. The last group of people to come, they were also probably Italic. And both of these groups came like pretty late, or rather, I should say pretty early. Like late, it's late, like in the 13th to 11th centuries. So it's much earlier than the, let's say, the Hellenistic period or the classical period, right? They're coming a long time before the Greeks show up, and then maybe at the turn of the century, that's when we start to see um, where we start to see Phoenicians spread out across the Mediterranean. So Gades is supposed to be founded like 1100 according to literature.
Gates?
Sicily, a good deal. Yeah, Cadiz, Gades, whatever you want to call it. It's in Spain.
Ah, got it. Okay.
And that's essentially the first Phoenician colony, supposedly, according to literature. Cadiz or Gades or whatever you want to call it is the first Phoenician colony, and again, that happens around 1100, I believe. And then Sicily, Phoenicians settle Sicily later, and after them come the Greeks.
So
Um,
was there any like united resistance among the Sicilians to colonization?
Absolutely. They, even though they sort of get overcrowded in our sources because all of the three groups start to become washed out by Greek and Phoenician culture. So, for instance, the Elymians and the Sakeli both end up using Greek alphabets to write their language, and they start building like Greek temples and things like that. So they get washed out pretty easily, but there are really big native Sicilian cities. So, for instance, we mentioned Segesta earlier and Eryx. Both of those are Elymian cities, not Greek, not Phoenician, and yet they are major powers on the island. And they're also more or less in most of the conflicts. The native peoples are being sort of pushed around or jockeyed with or dealt with by the other major powers of Sicily, so the Phoenicians and the Syracusans. But they are always a consideration. They're always, Syracuse is always thinking about, how can we deal with the sickles? How can we make sure that they don't try and backstab us, or how can we get them on our side? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a side note, too, by the way, if anybody is familiar with the Sea Peoples, who started the Bronze Age collapse, the sickles have been proposed as one of the groups of the Sea Peoples. They're called in the Sea Peoples sources. They're called the Shekelesh, which sounds like sickles.
Kind of sounds like sickles.
I think that's the extent of the evidence, but it's an interesting point, nevertheless.
Yeah, just linguistic similarity, you stretch it a long way when there's absolutely nothing else to go on.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So, that's the natives. But what about the Greeks? Who were Gelon and Theron? And, what was their deal?
Yeah, Gelon and Theron are pretty neat. Specifically because we usually don't, get a lot of information on Greeks from that period in Sicily. But Gelon and Theron are big names, specifically Gelon, and Gelon is constantly referred to in the literature of the period. He has plenty of interesting speeches. Theron has 2 odes to him by Pindar, who was a Greek poet. But they were both tyrants, and by tyrants I mean at the time when they were tyrants, the Greek word tyrant didn't imply what it does today. Today it implies a misuse of power or something like that. You're bad if you're a tyrant today. But in their period, tyrant basically just meant absolute ruler. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't misuse their power, but it didn't necessarily have the negative connotations until later.
So, quick linguistic question. So basileos, right, is the Attic Greek word for king. And tyrannos, right, is our word for tyrant, but they fill the same office. Is there a reason they were referred to as tyrants instead of basileoi?
It's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, but the word tyrant might refer to an actual specific function. But English, we have different words for the same thing as well. We have king, we have monarch, right? They're essentially generally the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, there'll probably be somebody better equipped than me to answer that question.
Fair enough. And it's not me, unfortunately. My Greek is medieval.
Yeah.
So
I'm more. Yeah, go ahead.
So were the Greek colonies always monarchic? Were they democratic, and did Gelon and Theron overthrow anybody, or did they just succeed to the throne?
Yeah, they were very especially Syracuse. Syracuse was known as being very hectic, very unstable, very volatile with respect to its government. So the colonies, much like the other Greek states, the colonies were at times oligarchic, democratic, autocratic. It's the same thing, it's with Syracuse, but also with Acragas and the other major Greek cities. They sometimes will get tyrants or autocrats who will instill or install democracy, oligarchy, etc. They'll try, but oftentimes it's overthrown. And I mean, we even get when Timoleon comes to power to Syracuse. If you've ever heard of him in the 4th century, he comes to power pretty much because the Corinthians were asked by the Syracusans to send them a leader who could untangle their political situation. So they're constantly in flux, and it's something to consider about the ancient period that in the US we have this, this holy constitution that is never supposed to be changed. And we've managed to sit with the same constitution for, 300 years or whatever, almost coming up, right?
Yeah.
But that is not the norm in the ancient period at all. Politics are constantly shifting, methods of government are constantly shifting. The way that Gelon specifically came to power, we're told by Herodotus this, that he was a ruler. Well, he became a ruler of Gela first, which is another major Sicilian colony, probably at the time the most powerful and biggest Sicilian Greek colony. And he was originally in 498. Hippocrates took over as sole ruler of Gela, and Gelon was originally part of his bodyguard. But because he was really good at, he was really good at what he did. He was just good at commanding troops. He was good at fighting. He quickly became like captain of the horse, which, if you know about military terminology, is essentially the second in command. He fought at a bunch of different places. He fought at Callipolis, Naxos, Zancle, Leontini, Syracuse, and when eventually Hippocrates will die, actually in battle with the sickles, and his sons will take over. At that point, then Gelon kind of starts putting into place some plans, and he overthrows the two sons of Hippocrates, sort of under the guise of putting out a rebellion, but he ultimately overthrows them and takes over Gela.
So when he
after he's taken Gela, then go ahead.
I was just wondering, when he overthrows like these kids, do they die or do they just get exiled?
That's a good point. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the sources tell us.
They're just gone.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, because what we get for this is a couple passages from Herodotus, which we're lucky to have because he's obviously a big enough figure for Herodotus to mention him, or his coming to age, his coming to governance. But as I said though, they were sons of Hippocrates, and they basically, the people decided they didn't like the rule of the sons rather quickly. They tried to overthrow the sons, and Gelon took command of the army, beat back the rebellion, and then overthrew the sons himself.
As one does.
As one does, yeah.
So,
I mean, when you have that kind of power.
Yeah, I mean, when you can just take over the army whenever you want, why not be king? But back into your actual arena of specialty, I want to ask some stuff about the Punic military really quickly. So we mentioned in our video that the Punic army that was used to fight against the Greeks was composed of Gauls and Iberians and Numidians and Carthaginians and Phoenicians and Sicilians, like people from all over the Mediterranean. How did that happen?
Oh yeah. And I'm not going to go too far into this because we've actually got a video coming sometime soon on the Carthaginian army, so we can spend like 20 minutes on this topic or something like that, maybe more. But I will say that if we start out, the army sizes that they tell us in the ancient sources are huge. They're monstrously big. They say 300,000 men and over 200 ships of war. That's gigantic, and there's no way that that's correct. But nevertheless, we should probably still assume that this was a big army of people. And if you were an ancient Carthaginian and you wanted to fill out a big giant army like this, you would need to turn to elsewhere other than just the city and citizens. Normally, ancient city-states like to use citizens for their armies because they trust them.
Yeah, citizen militia is kind of the standard for a really long time.
Yeah. It's very much the standard with maybe some contingents of allies here and there, but citizen hoplite phalanx, that's the standard. And Carthage doesn't do exactly this. They still have citizen soldiers from time to time, and we can assume that they had citizen soldiers in a lot of their armies. We're told that they have Phoenicians in most of their armies, which might be citizens, might not be. But largely, their armies are backboned by non-citizen peoples, and those would be, I believe, at Hemera. We have a list from Herodotus, and that's the Phoenicians, the Libyans, the Iberians, the Ligurians, the Elisices, who are from southern France, the Sardinians, and the Corsicans. So there's a ton of different people. The different groups, some of them, like the Phoenicians, right, might be Carthaginian citizens, or they might just be called upon by Carthage in a general levy. But the people like the Libyans, the North Africans, the Libby Phoenicians, so that is the people from the Libyan towns that have been Phoenicianized. They probably serve like the allies with Rome. They probably serve by treaties. So when they came into the Carthaginian sphere or the Carthaginian alliance, the Carthaginians told them, "You need to provide us this many men," and then they do that.
That sounds like
the
a
rest of
very
them,
disorganized and decentralized military with a lot of different ethnic groups with their own commanders who show up. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, it can be really tough. Hundreds of years later, we'll have this problem called the Mercenary War. It's in Polybius, Book One. If you haven't read it, it's great. But the Mercenary War was essentially that problem. They had a ton of different mercenary and allied groups, and they were all getting mad that they weren't getting paid, and they rebelled because the Carthaginians just simply were not able to deal with them well enough in their own specific languages, and they weren't able to deal with each specific group. They were supposed to have Carthaginian officers to oversee all these people, and usually it works, but sometimes it doesn't, and in those cases, it is disastrous.
Speaking of disastrous, the Battle of Hemera, which is the end of our first Punic Sicilian Wars episode, where the disguised Greeks sneak into the Carthaginian camp and raise hell. How did that happen? Like,
Yep.
surely it can't be that easy to just disguise yourself. It can't be as simple as painting your shield and just riding into a military camp.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I would start by saying that in the ancient period, we don't see these easy distinguishers of troops that we see nowadays, right? Nowadays, everybody's in the specific uniform of their side. They didn't have uniforms back then. They had other markers, things like, you'd have a banner that you stick by. But it could be difficult sometimes to tell who was friend and who was foe. We see that in a couple of battles. But in our case, we have three conflicting events, or three conflicting stories of this event, right? The first is from Herodotus, where Herodotus says that this never happened. He doesn't mention it at all. He says that when that Hamilcar was in the camp making sacrifices, and when the battle turned against him, he jumped in the fire and sacrificed himself. Herodotus is the shortest account, though, and this is sort of just an aside. It sounds more like it's a rumor than anything, and I believe Diodorus's account because it's longer, it's more detailed, it makes more sense. And Diodorus is the one who says that the cavalry came into the Carthaginian camp as disguised as infiltrators. And how this happened specifically was that Gelon had apparently intercepted a letter from Selinus, which is at this time an allied city to Hamilcar. And Selinus said that they would send Carthage cavalrymen that day. And so Gelon intercepted this letter, and he thought, well, I'm Greek. I could pretend to be those cavalrymen. And he sent some cavalry around the back as if they were coming from Selinus. And then he sent another group of scouts to kind of make sure it all went okay. And that's when we get the story of the cavalry going in. So apparently they were just dressed like Selinus people. They just said that they were from Selinus.
Hey, we're Greek.
And
Do any
it
of you
worked
guys
well
speak
enough.
Greek? No?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So, and they were able to go in and supposedly kill Hamilcar and then set fire to the ships. The third story that we have of what might have happened was that This comes from Polybius. And he was, once again, he was just kind of writing little witticisms, so he's probably not to be trusted perfectly here. But he says that Gelon saw that he was outnumbered, and then he made to go entreat with Hamilcar. So he said to Hamilcar, like, let's go have a chat. But instead he dressed somebody else in his own clothes, and then he sent that somebody with a bunch of people with concealed bows under their clothes, and then those guys assassinated Hamilcar. So it's a different story, but it has the same level of trickery in it,
Once again,
so
breaking the Geneva Conventions.
Yeah. Whoever you want to believe, that's sort of up to you. Diodorus Siculus is, once again, the longest account, probably the most trustworthy. He's closer to the events than Polybius. He gives the most detail, so that's kind of who we pick to decide. But certainly it seems like some kind of trickery happened, and all three of the stories have to do with Hamilcar making sacrifices. So some kind of weird event while he's making sacrifices, he got tricked somehow.
So with that, that's all of our prepared questions and all of our patron questions. So we can move on to a couple of audience questions. And the first one, I think the most pressing and also very interesting, is where did Carthage get the wood to build all those ships?
Yeah, good question.
So, do you happen to know?
I believe at the time there are woodlands around Carthage, but I'm not exactly sure. It's a good question. Wood is a very precious commodity in the ancient period. The reason why, or one of the reasons I should say, why the Phoenicians were so well known for their shipbuilding and why they became the sailors, right, is because they had plentiful wood forests right around Phoenicia in an area where not a lot of other places did. So they had access to wood, they could build these ships. Probably, similar with Carthage. But if they needed wood from elsewhere, Carthage was at least to a large degree, set up as a trading power. They wanted to command the seas. They wanted to command trading systems and trading networks, so they could just get it from the places where they, needed to go.
The area around like Carthage and Tunisia, like today, is quite barren, or at least it's certainly portrayed as quite barren. That might not actually be the truth. Did the Carthaginians over-harvest their like local wood populations to make these navies?
It's actually a problem with desertification, which is just a term to say that some areas of the world have become more deserted. The desert that is south of Carthage just kind of over years just crept up to closer and closer to Carthage. But at the time of Carthage's most, of their greatest power, the area around Carthage was actually known to be very bountiful. It was well known to be very good for farming olives. They had all these different estates. It's like one of the major places in the world that the ancient historians tell us was like the best for farming. So it's definitely not the desert that it is today. Although it's not entirely a desert today, but it's definitely, it's much more so than it was.
Yeah, the climate has since shifted because I know in the medieval period, like at least in the early medieval period, Carthage was another breadbasket. Like Egypt first, but Carthage was like a close second when it comes to just grain production.
Absolutely. And it's actually well known for having a lot of like villas where, people could go on vacation and stuff like that, like pleasure estates, big giant estates, that kind of thing.
So I also have a question here. Were the Carthaginians Phoenicians or Berbers?
It's a good question. They're both. So they begin as Phoenician colonies, but if as you might expect from the composition of their army, they become very multicultural. So the original people who were living there, they sort of meld in with the Carthaginians, with the Phoenicians, with the Libyans, all these different peoples. They're all melding into the same cities. We even have like plenty of Greeks who end up settling in Carthage and in closer cities. So it's a multicultural group of people, and that's why we call a lot of the Phoenician cities around Carthage. We like to call them Libyan Phoenicians, because they're more of a mix between the local Libyan people and the Phoenicians. And I might add too, Libyan is an exonym, I believe. So that's another Greek word that was imposed on the local people. Yeah.
Interesting. And we got another super chat from Charlie Spur. Probably the same place they got their forest elephants from. I assume you're referring to the forests that surround Carthage. But where? I guess this is kind of a hard question, but like the North African forest elephant would obviously be found in North African forests.
Yeah.
So
They are. Yeah. I can speak a little bit to it.
Sure, go ahead.
The elephants that the Carthaginians used were mostly North African, so they're a little bit smaller than their Indian counterparts. Yeah, they do come from obviously the forests in North Africa. The one exception is that Hannibal was supposed to have ridden on the biggest elephant, a Syrian elephant. He was called the Syrian, I believe. And that was an Indian elephant that they had somehow imported all the way there. But for the most part, yeah, they caught him in the North African areas.
It had to be a wild ride for that elephant to be taken all the way across the world and then, march over the Alps.
He made it. I think he was one of the only elephants, maybe the only, to make it across the Alps. He made it all the way across all the way from Syria, all the way, must have been through Spain, all the way through Gaul, across the Alps, down into Italy, where I think eventually he died. I think possibly in the swamps when they're going through.
So, next audience question: how would you compare the naval domination of Carthage to how would you put that in modern terms? Like, would you compare it to the Royal Navy of the British Royal Navy in the 19th century, the Dutch Navy in the 17th century, or the Spanish Navy in the 16th century? I definitely can't answer that. I don't know anything about navies.
It's a good question. I think it's hard to compare it to modern stuff, or more modern stuff, I should say, because I think, as somebody mentioned in the chat earlier, one of the largest reasons why Carthage was so navy dominant and why they put so much into their navy and whatnot was because they were the naval power. So you get a lot of navies off to the east and the Hellenistic kingdoms and everything like that, but they were the power that was investing in their navy in that area, and so there wasn't really good competition. When we get to the third Punic or the first Punic War, the Romans have to specifically build a bunch of fleets, and at this they suck at. They build a bunch of fleets, but they end up getting a bunch of them wrecked in storms because they don't know how to sail. So it's really, to me, it's at least in part a case of them basically having the only big navy in town.
Did they
were
use that
challenged at
navy
times, but
to get away with some piracy? Because I know when I was like studying roads back in college, I had learned that most ancient navies just like when they weren't doing anything military, they just kind of acted as pirates. So were Phoenician pirates common?
Phoenician pirates are very common. Even during wartime, it's really a case of piracy in the ancient period was not so much like we think of it in the Golden Age, right? In the Golden Age, if you're a pirate, you're an enemy of every government. But in the ancient period, lots of pirates were basically either state-sponsored or were readily state-sponsored. So, for instance, when war breaks out on a couple of occasions, we end up with privateers in the Carthaginian Navy who are just willing to serve for pay. But there are a lot of Phoenician pirates, whether they're associated with the state or not. And then during wartime, that's really when you see piracy ramp up. Which I guess at that point it's not really piracy, but it's the same general idea where the Carthaginian ships, like especially during the First and Second Punic War, will just kind of skirt the edges of Italy or Sicily and raid towns and enslave towns and things like that.
So there's a quick question in here for me. Medieval heavy cavalry, did they smash into the opposing force like the movies, or was that just not realistic? Well, I can actually speak to that just a little bit. specifically with Byzantine cataphracts, because we have the Strategicon of Maurice and the Strategicon of Pseudo Maurice, which both outline cavalry tactics. And the way super heavy cavalry was used was as headhunters. Typically, you would take your cataphracts and point them towards a banner or a general or wherever the center of the enemy army is, and they would smash that line and try to kill that general as quickly as possible in order to break the enemy line. So, cataphracts and other super heavy cavalry only had an effective fighting time of like 30 minutes because their armor just weighed so much. So you would point them at a target and they would break it, and either that turned the tide of the battle or it didn't. And then they had to pull out. You couldn't like keep them in combat for a long time. They were headhunters. They were assassins, essentially. They were there to put a lot of weight on one part of the line, break the formation, get the king, and like either that wins the battle or it doesn't.
So,
That-
Sophia, are you saying that assassins weren't dressed in black pajamas? They were just dressed in super heavy armor on super heavy armored horses, and they charged with really big lances?
The best assassin is a sledgehammer, in my opinion. You just smash someone's teeth in and you win. Especially if everyone sees you smash someone's teeth in.
If I might add, too, there's been a considerable amount of debate on this, scholarly and just, by armchair historians, about whether a horse will crash into like a guy with a spear. And as far as I know, the scholarly consensus right now is that if you get a horse going fast enough, especially if you put blinders on them, they have weight on their side. If you get them going fast enough, then they physically cannot change course when they get to that line, and they will just crash through whatever is in front of them.
And hopefully the horse gets to live through this.
Hopefully. He's a good boy, so...
And an expensive boy. Like, a warhorse
Yes.
big enough to carry all that armor and all of that armored soldier is a very expensive piece of equipment. Not
Yes.
in addition to being a horse that has been pressed into war, which, like, that sucks for the horse, let's be honest.
Yeah. I've seen Warhorse, okay?
Oh god, warhorse, I'm gonna start crying.
That's
So
an accurate depiction.
we have another question here, which is why didn't Hannibal just land on a beach and take Rome? Why did he go over the Alps? Do you know, Vaughn?
Yeah, he didn't have command of the seas. In the Third War, eventually Carthage, after it's like 30 years of war almost, the First Punic War goes through. So 264 to 241, constant warfare. It's extremely expensive, and by the end of it, Carthage just gets its butt handed to it. Specifically with respect to the navy, so they divest from their navy in a lot of ways, and by the time of the Second Punic War, they just simply don't have naval superiority, so they can't really afford to go through just hop on ships and land over there. The second reason is that he was coming from Spain, and for whatever reason, he chose the route around the Alps because he thought that it would surprise the Romans. The Romans would never think that a well-disciplined, huge army would just come through the Alps.
Well, didn't
in
he
a lot of
also
ways-
raise most of his army in Spain? I thought the reason that he took that route was because it was through his family's lands, where he could raise a
Some
lot
of
of
them
like
were.
his own troops.
Yes, yeah. So at the time, they had just finished basically conquering Spain. Hannibal, sacked Saguntum, which was like one of the last holdouts in Spain for the Carthaginians. And so that was where his family's power base was in Spain. He could count on it for not only for raising troops, but for keeping his own power. And he, we also need to remember that he did all these things basically without asking the Carthaginians. He sent over, more or less, what he would do is he would send over things to say, I'm doing this, and then the Carthaginians would usually assent, and they would say, yeah, great, let's go kick their butts this time. But he didn't really ask for permission. It was more of a, ask for forgiveness later kind of deal.
So would it be
And so... Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, would it be accurate to term Hannibal's campaign like, if Carthage wasn't directing Hannibal at all, this was his own personal war?
Yeah, at least in Italy it was. It was his own personal war, and the Carthaginians were more or less not interested in supporting him in that endeavor. They had some raiding in Sicily and stuff like that. They fought in Sicily, but for the most part, most of their troops went to Spain because they were concerned with Spain. They didn't want to take over Italy. So that's part of the reason why Hannibal spends so long there and gets hardly any support, is because generally the Carthaginian Senate and whatnot was not interested in trying to push for gains in Italy. They were trying to push for gains in Spain. So in that sense, the war in Italy is 100% it's Hannibal's war, whereas the war in Spain and in Sicily and elsewhere is a wider war against Carthage.
So didn't Hannibal have like a blood feud with like the Roman Republic in general? Like he had something personal in
His supposedly, I don't remember exactly which source this comes from, but it might be Livy. I think it's Livy. But supposedly, his father had him like swear that he would destroy the Romans at all costs. I don't believe that
Roma
actually
Delenda
happened. I think it's
est. That's
yeah. I think it's a later thing because Hannibal is basically the boogeyman to Rome, and so by that time they're just writing all these crazy things about him. Um, but yeah, I mean, probably his father did actually really dislike Rome, really hate Rome, because his father was actively involved in fighting the Romans in the First Punic War, and then during the Mercenary War afterwards. He was in command of the armies when the Romans just decided to seize Sardinia and Corsica. And
so
his
I
father is Hasdrubal, by the way.
well, there are a lot of Hasdrubals. Did
True. His father is Hasdrubal Barca.
I'm that means nothing to me. I know the
Right.
Barcans were a powerful dynasty.
Yeah, he's basically the first of the dinosaur. He's the first of the dynasty. He fought in the First Punic War. He was the major general towards the end, and he was pretty much winning. He was at least stalemating if he wasn't winning. He was winning his engagements, but it wasn't enough to win the war, and he was just kind of holding things on for them. When eventually the Romans beat the Carthaginians at the Battle of the Egadi Islands, and that's when the state surrendered for him, basically. So he probably wanted to continue the war. Wasn't Probably wasn't super happy about being the one who's winning the war for them, only to have somebody else lose it.
Yeah. What were you saying, Christina, about Hasdrubal?
Oh, nothing. I was just making an offhanded remark, kind of joke about how they all kind of sound the same.
They do.
Even I get
They
confused from
do. do.
They do.
Well, as we said, Julian got confused. So
yeah.
Yeah,
or
we'll all
Justin,
get
sorry, not
confused.
Julian.
So, and here is one final question, and then after that, we're gonna do like maybe some closing remarks, talk directly to the audience, and then close out the stream. But our final Vaughn-related question is: did Persia and Carthage coordinate the attack on the Greek world?
Oh, that's right. So the Greek sources tell us that they did, or at least tell us that there's a rumor that they did. And I'm more inclined to believe that, as I think most historians are, that this is sort of a way that the Greeks in Sicily drummed up their own mortal enemy. So in the east, the Greeks of the mainland had the mortal enemy of Persia that they could point to all the time and say that the Persians were coming to get them, and the Persians were trying to do this. The Persians were the evil people. The Greeks wanted to use the Carthaginians as that group, which to an extent they were, but it's probable that they did not coordinate this attack. That these two attacks just happened to happen along the same time. It's possible that the Carthaginians sort of knew what was going on, what was the situation in the east, uh, or vice versa, that the Persians knew that the Carthaginians wanted to push in the west, and so they they didn't like send letters to each other and decide to attack at once, but you're more likely to attack a Greek in the west if you know that the Greeks in the east are predisposed.
Interesting. So they could have, but it was most likely just Greek rumors.
Yeah, I mean, they probably didn't actively like send letters to each other to coordinate the attacks. But it certainly it's written down in the sources that Gelon, one of the reasons why he did not come to help in the invasion of the Persians was because he was fighting the Carthaginians. So it's possible that either the Carthaginians decided, okay, we've heard that there's warfare going on with the Persians in Greece, so why don't we take this opportunity to attack the Greeks in the west? While we're sure that no support is going to come from the east. So that's possible, but I don't think they sent a letter to the Persians saying, hey, let's coordinate this exact time to be able to attack, because number one, it's just it's a little bit too much, and number two, it's basically impossible at this time period to coordinate things that well.
Thank you for the
they're so far
donation,
away.
Crown Hetman.
Yeah.
Sorry to talk over you, Vaughn, but he says good job.
Oh, you're good. I'm basically done. So.
And thanks. Always nice to get a pat on the back. And $5. $5 is pretty nice. Huh?
Yes, we love that.
We do. So at that point, I think we've finished everything that we wanted to accomplish with this stream. So to the chat, do you guys have anything that you want us, like, anything at all about the channel that you'd like to know?
Oh no, that's a dangerous question.
Yeah, it is a dangerous question. We will pick the answers. We get to pick which questions we're going to answer. But if there's anything you'd like to ask us, the historians, about the channel or about our work or about what we do, now would be the time.
While we're waiting on questions to come in from chat, there was actually a question that was asked at the very top, possibly before we restarted the stream, of how many human beings are on the team that makes these videos.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and like the joke, of course, was, we're all AI, ha ha ha. But yeah, no, we're just 4 of the people who are on the team. We've also got Julian, we've got other researchers, and we've got an entire team of artists that it puts in a whole heck of a ton of hard work to put in all of the for the record, all the art that we use is unique. Like you can't find this elsewhere on the internet.
Yeah, no,
And
we are the source of a lot of the historical art that, like, exists. Like, if you're looking up most things, like, our team, Pentacreate, like, our artists, they've done, like, most of it. And they're an amazing team. They do so much work. In fact, you could see on the side that we have some promotional stuff for printerpanther.com. That is Pentacreate's website. That's the art team. All of the money that you, like, if you buy anything from there, that all goes directly to them. And you should. They are amazing. They're a wonderful art team.
If I can just add one more thing too, you'll see the link for the Patreon in the lower right corner of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually get the HD artwork for each of the new videos that come out. And so you can have your, access to the artwork yourself for your desktop or your mobile device by joining the Patreon.
Yeah, you should totally become patrons. The Discord is sadly, more people need to come and talk to us because I get bored doing nothing all day. So let's see a couple of these questions. Did I enjoy 300? No. I thought 300.
300.
I thought 300 was a terrible movie.
It is an artwork.
It is.
If you treat it as a fantasy movie, it's fun.
Wait,
what treat it as a historical.
Yeah, did we like
Yeah.
the movie, the one that I think this didn't. It came out a couple years ago, right? 300 came out when I was in high school, probably.
Yeah, it came out over. I think it was at least 2006 or so.
No way. 300. When did this come out? 300 movie. Hold on.
Google
March 9th, 2007.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh my god.
300 2006, 300 Rise of an Empire 2014. I hated both movies.
Rise of an Empire was garbage, but the original was a masterpiece because it is, if you look at it through the perspective of like Herodotus telling the story, all of a sudden it's like, no, this is exactly what Herodotus would have wanted.
Herodotus would have wanted the half-naked men and the like 7-foot tall Xerxes and literal
Exactly.
ogres. If you want a good historic movie, and this is coming from the medievalist, if you want a good historic movie that gets my personal seal of approval, you should watch Kingdom of Heaven with Liam Neeson and like Orlando Bloom. And get the 3-hour director's cut. That's a good movie.
Oh, I guess I should watch that.
It's a very good representation of the Crusades. It's so cool. I've watched that movie like 10 times.
It's a good movie.
It's the only time I've ever seen an Ethiopian crusader represented on screen. Like at the very beginning of the movie, like Liam Neeson comes back from crusade with all of his guys, and like there's an Ethiopian Christian there, which, you know, we never talk about them. We never talk about how Ethiopia, like Coptic Christianity, exists. Yes, Kingdom of Heaven is so good. You're right, chat. You're absolutely right. It's the best movie.
It is a really good movie. It's a really good movie.
I'll have to watch it at some point.
It's one of my favorites. I've watched it so many times. It's incredibly long. Is it on Netflix? I don't know. I just have a physical copy of the movie.
Wow, are you old?
I am old. A lot of historians do hate Kingdom of Heaven. King Mancevic, you're right. A lot of historians do really dislike Kingdom of Heaven, but it's a good movie. Like, it's mostly correct. Like, its portrayal of Islam is okay, especially because it came out in the like post 9/11 world. So like it's really important that, like, you know, it's reasonable, but it's so good. Such a good movie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're ever going to get a perfect history movie or show for that matter. So you just kind of have to treat it like appreciating the things that they do well and not really worrying so much about the other stuff.
That's the one.
Okay, this one's to all of us. If you were to witness one historical event, what would it be? What do you want to see, guys?
Dude, that's a hard question. If I only get to see one historical event, what would I want to see? Does it have to be something we know happened, or does it have to be something?
I think we can get a little fast and loose with this.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to pick something that we just don't have any information from the sources.
I mean, for me, it would have to be something Byzantine. I'd love to see the coronation of an emperor. I'd love to like stand there and like watch all the rites and stuff. Any given emperor would be cool.
Part of the question is, can I like watch it but not be in danger and be able to come home? Like, all these caveats are really, really very important.
Let's say that you're just like floating in the sky. You could safely view this.
You know, I think I would just pick an average day.
You know what? You're right.
That's such a good answer.
That is the question that everyone asks us. They're like, so what was the average person doing? It's like, we don't know. We would never know.
I would just
I'm gonna take like a proper Roman vacation and like hit up like, you know, the Miami, the South Beach of, you know, Rome. That'd be kind of fun.
You go to Baie and Pompeii.
Hell yeah.
I would love to just walk through like the city of Constantinople in its prime in like 1100 or so, and seeing like the yogurt salesman and the street plays and like see the guards and all that. I would just love to walk through this city. That'd be so good.
Yeah, I very much would go for a daily life thing, or maybe a Roman triumph. I think I would really like to see a Roman triumph.
That would be pretty cool. Seeing a triumph
even though I'm a you know, a military historian, no way in the world would I want to see an ancient battle.
Oh God, no.
It would be
that's one thing I would not want to see. A
Yeah.
Roman battle would be horrifying. I would.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
I mean, Kanai would be absolutely just a bloodbath, just a horrific mess.
Can you imagine the smell?
Do you want to spend your
smell-
entire time where you pick one thing and you get to stand in the sky and see one thing? Do you want to spend that entire time throwing up? Because that's what would happen.
that would be Kanai.
Battle
You
to
would
the-
lose faith in all of humanity. It would be horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, an ancient battlefield is the last thing I want to see.
Yeah, I'm good.
Of course, if I
Yeah,
wanted to get like very pretentious, I'd love to see the trial of Socrates. If only so that I can throw tomatoes at Socrates.
We do want to make fun of Socrates. Making fun of Socrates is frankly like, yeah, that's a
You know,
pretty pick.
I want to hang out with Diogenes. Like, the man would stink, but I just think he would be kind of fun to hang out with.
I definitely want to see what his deal is. I would also like to hang out with Xenophon, even though he's probably like, he's got the biggest stick up his butt. Like, Xenophon wouldn't, like, I don't think Xenophon would like me, but I love his work so much, I'd love to just talk to him. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that'd be my answers.
Yeah, Xenophon's got a storied life. You know, you could go a lot of directions with that.
Xenophon's a cool guy. You could, like, walk into the March of the 10,000. There's an event that we should cover eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It would be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Hypothetically, if we did something like that.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
Okay, at this point, we're just repeating words. I think we should let all of you guys go. I hope you liked this stream. We're going to be doing this every month. Hopefully, this will be the worst one, and they're only going to get better from here. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
So,
honestly, I had a great time.
I thought it was great. I had a fabulous time.
okay. See you all next time.
All right. Cheers, guys.
Okay.